Hey guys, I'm Keith and welcome to the Jones Jeep channel. Today we're going to be talking about specifically Gen 3 Hemis and more specifically valve spring shimming. Very important. One of the biggest parts of putting in a new camshaft is valve spring shimming. Very important to not let your valve interfere with the piston, being not enough spring pressure to close the valve with a big cam. So let's get started.
All right. So we're installing the valves. We just got everything lapped in. I've got the valve seals on, and we're installing the shims and the spring seat on aluminum head. Make sure you always put a spring seat in because the springs are tool steel and it will eat into the aluminum. So the shims will always go under the spring seat. So I know pretty much it's going to be 15 thousandths. That's what this is. They come in different sizes, 15, 30, 60 thousandths. Depends on how many valve jobs you've had on your heads and how far the seat is sunk into the head, depending on how much you need to shim the valve springs. So you're going to put the shim first, the seat. I have my tool here. This is the spring height measuring tool. So I'm going to stick that on. We're going to put the retainer on. Put the locks on. Sometimes it's tricky to get the locks in here without, you got to kind of elbow them in from the bottom out, and they're chamfered, so make sure the smaller ends to the bottom, of course. Now I'm just going to adjust the spring height tool so it stops. Always adjust it to where you can read it, so the measuring is right there. So now I'm going to adjust it to where I can read it, and so it's always an inch, so I'm 1 inch. I'm a little more than 9, so 1.935 install height. Take my locks back off. My retainer stays in there. Now that I'm one extra thing is you need to measure the actual height and calibrate your tool. So I've already done that, and my spring retainers are sitting down inside of this lip. So I'm going to have to subtract the amount of that lip from this surface to get the full height of it. So I'm at 1935. Then I'm going to take my caliper and measure it down the bottom. There's a little tip that comes out here that measures depth. So I'm going to measure the depth of that, and I'm 0.153. Measure it again. 0.153. Then I just subtract the 0.153 from the 0.1935, and that should give me my advertised closed spring height of 1.80 inches. And that's closed, and that's why you shim that, to get that exact height. So my pressure, 125 pounds, will be at 1.8 inches. If you're less, it'll be, of course, tighter, more pressure, and if you're greater, then it'll be less. So I measured the spring height with the spring height gauge. Then I subtracted the distance away, which is 1.53, and that comes up with 1.782. So that tells me that I'm tighter, so higher spring pressure. So if I take a 15 thousandth shim off, 1.782 should be close to 1.8. So I'm going to measure it again. It's easier to do this without the spring, so might as well just 1950. 1.95 minus 0.153, 1.797. That's close enough. So I'm going to leave the shim out of this one. We're just setting the spring seat directly onto the head. Checked it again. I raised the spring seat up just to make sure that there's no shim on the head. My shim's right here. Keep your shims all one at a time, separated from each other. Don't keep a stack of shims. That way you know if you have one under there or not when you put it back together, and you still have one left over. Make lots of different spring tools. Sure, and put your retainer in like I almost didn't do. Spring seats on. Make sure if you have one of these tools, make sure you're right on the valve itself, and then you'll just clamp it down. Put your locks on, and slowly let it back up. It's going to be a lot of pressure. Just let it back up, and then there you go. You have a spring seat, locks, seal, valve seat, valve lapped in, everything installed. And you repeat all the way down for intake and exhaust. All right, I've got all the spring shims under the spring cups installed. I've mic'd them all with my spring length checker. I'm all at 1.8 inches, which equates to 125 pounds closed. It's exactly what the box says. So you can see that right here. And now I'm just going to go quickly and install all these.
This concludes our valve spring installation shimming video. If you have any other questions or comments, please leave them in the section below. See you next video.